This is the download recap from Sounds Profitable, the most important news from this week and why it matters to people in the business of podcasting. I'm Gavin Gaddis. The download recap is brought to you by Podscribe. You can find out more at podscribe.com. Now let's get into the top stories from this week. The AI enthusiasm gap, listeners versus watchers. Tom Webster's Sounds Profitable article this week preempted the new report, Audio Primes, the podcast industry's most valuable audience. The report defines audio primes as podcast landscape respondents who consume at least 75% of their podcast content as audio. And video primes are also described as people who consume 75% of their content in podcasting as video. This group reflects a mindset, not a demographic. Here's a quote from Webster's article, quote, "Here's one example. We asked both groups how they'd react if they learned that one of their favorite podcasts featured AI-generated voices. Among audio primes, 48% said they'd be less likely to continue listening. Only 15% said they were more likely. That tracks with what you'd expect. Audio-first listeners value authenticity in the channel they've chosen, and an AI voice feels like a violation of the contract." End quote. On the subject of an AI voice in their favorite podcast, video primes expressed double the acceptance of audio primes when it came to more likely to continue listening responses. That's 30% versus audio primes, 15%. Webster argues that video podcast audiences have more exposure to synthetic content on places such as short-form video platforms. Audio-first listeners see it as replacing their preferred content. Video consumers see it as a contextual tool. Podcasts on the big screen. Samba TV's Vice President Measurement Science, Alyson Sprague, debuts its first Netflix podcast ranker. As reported by Ashley Carman in her Soundbite newsletter, Samba's data comes from chips in, quote, tens of millions, end quote, of United States smart TVs, weighted against U.S. Census data. Carman notes Netflix CFO Spencer Newman said video podcasts over-index on Netflix users' mobile devices beyond Samba's data. According to Samba's ranker, 13% of Netflix households watched a podcast in Q1 of 2026. The Breakfast Club dominates the individual podcast ranker, accounting for 44% of Samba-tracked views in Q1. By comparison, second place on the chart goes to Bridgerton, the official podcast, with just 16% of total views. Carman also clarifies that the dataset used for the podcast ranker qualifies a view as 1 minute of watch time. YouTube is actually giving viewers fewer ads on live streams. YouTube added 2 new live stream features that improve the ad experience for both creators and viewers. Whenever a user sends a paid item, such as a super chat or virtual gift, ads will be paused specifically for that viewer giving the gift. This prevents ill-timed ads from interrupting the streamer's reaction. A new YouTube blog post also says the system will recognize when a stream's chat is at its most active and automatically delay ads for all viewers. Here's a quote from the blog post, quote, "To protect that collective vibe, our system now recognizes when live chat engagement is at its peak and automatically holds back ads for everyone. This helps you keep the momentum going for the whole community without being broken up by an ad. This also works only when you have automatic ads turned on." End quote. This is a particularly notable feature for live streamers and live podcast productions, as they have long had issues with automated ad breaks interrupting the flow of an active chat. Rewarding audience engagement has the potential to curry favor with both the creators entertaining an audience and the platforms protecting those engaging moments audiences are experiencing. Everyone wants to buy a podcast again. A new article from Steve Ray's on Media Built looks back at the pre-pandemic era of podcasting, when companies already in podcasting or adjacent to the industry drove mergers and acquisitions. Spotify bought Gimlet, SiriusXM Media bought Stitcher. The buyers had existing vested interests in podcasting. Nowadays, OpenAI has acquired TVPN, the Churning Group has invested in companies like Goalhanger and AudioChuck, and Fox Entertainment has acquired Red Seat Ventures. Raises argues the main difference is that this new wave of merger and acquisition activity focuses on audience rather than raw numbers. Here's a quote from the piece, quote, "I wrote about this same dynamic earlier this year with Markiplier, who used 38 million YouTube subscribers to put a self-financed horror film into 3,000 theaters without a studio. The podcast version of that logic is playing out in every deal in this cycle. The acquirers aren't pricing content, they're pricing the density and convertibility of audience relationships," end quote. As the podcast landscape 2025 data shows, 55% of Americans have listened to a podcast in the past month. The medium has reached mainstream status, but pure reach doesn't make a company valuable. Today's acquisitions represent investments in shows that have proven they can leverage those audiences. Finally, it's time for quick hits. These are articles from throughout the week that didn't fit into top stories today, but are still worth including in your weekend reading. First up, mark your calendars. AdsWiz, Barometer, and NPR teaming up for a webinar on Thursday, April 23rd at noon Eastern Standard Time to discuss how traditional targeting approaches can fall short in audio and what a more audio-native approach to targeting looks like. The presentation will include SiriusXM Media and AdsWiz Director of Ad Quality Measurement Stacey Hultgren, Barometer CEO and co-founder Tamara Zupati Nelson, and NPR SVP Corporate Sponsorships Scott Davis. Amplify Media founder and CEO Stephen Goldstein has a new piece reflecting on a question asked in a recent Steve Raises issue of Bad on Mic. Is podcasting optimizing the wrong thing? A new Magellan AI case study details its work with American public media to bring the gap between the value of APM's content and what it could demonstrate to buyers. After a year integrating Magellan AI into its digital audio sales and campaigns, American public media posted its strongest digital sales since 2021. And finally, as video podcasting grows and platforms like Netflix enter, podcasting sits at the crossroads of audio, video, and streaming. Ad Results Media's new playbook tackles the opportunities and ambiguities of podcasting's evolution. That's it for this week's edition of the Download Recap, brought to you by Sounds Profitable. I know I go through the stories fast, so remember, there's a link in your show notes to every article I just mentioned. It'll also take you to the website where you can subscribe to the newsletter version to get the next edition direct to your email inbox. For Sounds Profitable, I'm Gavin Gaddis. Our producers are myself, Brian Barletta, Molly DeMillier, and Tom Webster. And special thanks to you for sticking with me as I brought you all the top stories from the past week in the business of podcasting. Robot.
Download complete.